chapter to our colleague Garry Cockburn that I suppose most of you know and needs no much introduction. But for the new people, I will just say a few words. He has been the past president of IIBA, a member of the Board of Trustees. He's from New Zealand, where he practiced as a bioenergetic therapist. He teaches also, he's a trainer of bioenergetic analysis. He has written some articles, one of them in the International Journal of Bioenergetic Analysis, and he has participated in many panels around the world. And he will talk today about the face in the body of the other in bioenergetic analysis. Garry?
Kia ora tātou. I think before I start, if we stand up for a few minutes and Kia ora tātou, thank you. Professor Zoya, thank you very much for an inspiring delivery. The conference theme, the bioenergetic view of love, healing, connection and authenticity, it's a challenging one for us when we look at the world today, as the professor has outlined, a world where global warming and degrading of the environment is happening at a much faster rate than predicted, a world where income inequality has drastically increased in nearly all countries, and a world where the ideal of participatory democracy is threatened by the increasing number of authoritarian dictators who have appointed themselves for life, and where the movement, as the professor has outlined, towards collective paranoia seems to be gaining momentum. As Francisco mentioned, I am from New Zealand, and you will recall that on 15th of March this year, a gunman went into 2 mosques and slaughtered 51 people at prayer. The attack in New Zealand dropped many of us into what the Maori people of New Zealand called te kore, the void, the black emptiness where the soul experiences darkness and death. And it is the Maori belief that it is only the wailing and the grief of women that calls souls back out of the darkness and into te ao marama, the world of light, back into the world of feeling, of joy, sadness, and love. And in New Zealand, we were blessed by having a Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, whose steel-like strength and motherly grief were instantly recognised as resonating what is best in human beings, when she said to the Muslim community, "You are us." And out of te kore, the black void, she called forth an authentic outpouring of love, healing, and connection with our Muslim brothers and sisters, not only in New Zealand, but around the world. And when I was traveling to the conference, we stopped in Dubai. And in Dubai is the tallest building in the world, called the Burj Khalifa. And the Muslim people of that country projected a photo of our Prime Minister embracing a Muslim woman onto that whole building. So that our Prime Minister's love for the other was projected into the heart of the Muslim world. The need for the archetypal. The crises of modernity that we are facing, especially the darkness, as a totalizing political, consumerist, and digital systems take over the world, calls for something deeper in our understanding to stop us falling into the deadening sameness that is pervading the world. We need to open up to the resources that are inherent in the archetypal ideas that the professor has been discussing in his work. Carl Jung writes that the archetypal, the inherited instinctual patterns of the psyche, become accessible when the ego functions are disrupted by trauma. And with tragedies like what happened recently in Sri Lanka and in Christchurch, where our ego functioning was shattered, we get insights into two areas of experience. Firstly, the archetypal darkness of the collective paranoia that the professor has spoken and written about in his book Paranoia, where the other becomes the enemy. And secondly, we get insights into the deep archetypes of love, connection, healing that are beyond ego connectedness, and where the other becomes an intimate brother or sister with whom we identify. As the New Zealand Prime Minister said, "You are us." Concerning the dark side of the archetypal, I believe we at this conference, and in fact people throughout the world, owe a great deal to the professor and the work he has been doing and for warning us about the dangers of collective paranoia. He has shown how the contagious nature of collective paranoia can devour whole societies and how modernization and globalization increase the number of excluded individuals who have lost contact with the other and become vulnerable to paranoia. This is no doubt exacerbated by the social media, whose speed and addictive qualities provide an easy platform for connection between hate-filled individuals. And I'm sure you're aware that in Christchurch, that murderer live-streamed his slaughter of 50 people right around the world. Also, the ubiquity, speed, and addictive power of digital computers and cell phones privileges and overemphasizes our visual sense. And I think this focus on the visual that we're all caught in today eclipses our somatic connection and proximity to the other, and blinding us to the deeper rhythms of life. On my way here I went to Porto for a few days and came here by changing trains 3 times. And at one of the stations, I was sitting in the train waiting for it to move, and there were 3 women 3 Portuguese women on the platform, talking. And they were 1, 2, 3, and they were very close to each other, and they were talking lovingly and animatedly with each other. And I thought, there it is. That is the somatic resonance connection with each other. There are 3 people connected. Whereas when I look down the carriage, everyone is separate, looking at their cell phone. That is what we live with today. The problem of evil, the eruption of evil and the prevalence of traumatic suffering around the world both threatens to overwhelm us, and it challenges us to think about the faulted and darker aspects of human nature. The problem of evil reveals a dark abyss or gap in our human understanding. As humans have sought for thousands of years to understand the nature of evil, and while theological and mythological frameworks can increase our understanding and give us stories such as the Garden of Eden and the Greek tragedies, ultimately human evil remains a deep mystery, and even more so on the psychological level. To understand human darkness, Freud posited a death instinct. And Kleinian psychoanalysts believe there is an inherent destructiveness and aggression in the human infant, a sort of original sin. What I would like to say is that we have some resources in our own bioenergetic tradition to illuminate both the darker and brighter aspects of human nature, and to guide us in our thinking of how we might make a more enlightened response to current crises in light of our conference theme. The resources I'm referring to are the writings and the legacy of Alexander Lowen. In the preface to his very first book, The Language of the Body, he wrote, quote, "Only with humility and candor dare one come face to face with the great wells of feeling which lie at the core of the human being." And in his book, Fear of Life, A Therapy for Being, Lowen wrote, "The inflated ego of modern man becomes a devil when it is not subordinated to the primacy of the body." Plainly, Lowen's insights were not just focused on creating a somatic psychotherapy. He had a vision into the promise and depth of what it was to be an embodied human being. The primacy of the body. Lowen's wisdom was to assert the primacy of the body and human feelings in the understanding of our personal and social situation, and it is this wisdom that has spoken to each of us and enkindled our commitment to bioenergetic analysis. And so Lowen's life was dedicated to a passionate understanding of the human situation and the promise of fulfillment that comes from accepting our human limitations and our fate. Lowen's wisdom was not based on some gentle understanding of human nature, but was based on the strongest aggression of the heart, a powerful stance in accord with Reich's revolutionary approach and with Freud's courage in shattering the sexual norms of the Victorian age. I'd like to expand on Lowen's assertion of the primacy of the body, his major contribution to the world of psychotherapy. You will recall some of his key statements, such as, You are your body. The self for me is the bodily self, the only self we will ever know. And doing good therapy is understanding that human nature is the body itself. We do need to remember that the key resource Lowen used to develop his insights into the primacy of the body was the Freudian inheritance he received through Wilhelm Reich. In his first book, The Language of the Body, Lowen was able to show how somatic processes underlie the psychic phenomena observed in Freudian psychoanalysis. He believed it was essential that bioenergetic analysis understood ego psychology with its focus on the psychic structures of ego, id, and superego, the instinctual drives of sex and aggression, and the Oedipus complex. This was in order to fully comprehend the character structure of individuals. I believe that modern bioenergetics has freed itself from the strictures of classical Freudian ego psychology by accepting the challenges inherent in the relational program that superseded classical drive theory in the 1980s. However, I believe we may also be in danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater if we throw out drive theory completely and do not hang on to the riches of the Freudian concept of Oedipality. The reason for this is that both drive theory and Oedipality are based on the primacy of the body, and it is the truth of the body and its feelings, not our ego-centered rationality, that gives us the most powerful insights into the depth of human nature. The Oedipus complex. At this point, I'm going to focus on the Oedipus complex. I think we all know the classical Freudian Oedipal complex relates to the idea of infantile or child sexuality. Freud believed that a child's incestuous feelings for the parent of the opposite sex were linked to murderous feelings towards the parent of the same sex. For Freud, this was resolved by the child suppressing these incestuous and murderous desires under the threat of castration, by suppressing any memory of the Oedipal situation itself, and by identifying with the parent of the same sex. If the child was unable to completely suppress all knowledge of these desires, he became neurotic and unable to fully adapt to the socio-cultural situation. We know that Freud named this process after Sophocles' tragedy, where Oedipus had unknowingly killed his father, Laius, and having solved the puzzle of the Sphinx, was rewarded by unknowingly marrying his biological mother, Queen Jocasta. Paradoxically, it was Oedipus's blindness to his own corruption and his faith in his own cleverness that eventually led him to discovering the truth, that he had married his mother and killed his father. And upon this discovery, he literally blinded himself. In Sophocles' play, Oedipus at Colonus, Oedipus eventually becomes a hero by placing himself in a sacred grove of trees where others feared to enter, humbly accepting the necessities of reality, in other words, accepting his faith. Lowen said that his book, Fear of Life, A Therapy for Being, was his most important book. I personally think The Language of the Body is, but he wrote his book, so he must know what the most important book is. This book, The Fear of Life, is both a therapeutic study of individuals struggling with Oedipus complex and a socio-cultural exposition of Sophocles' tragedy about Oedipus. So it's both those things. It's both a study of individual psychology and it's a social commentary. In trying to understand the modernity of the 20th century and the dysfunctional structures of Western societies that value power, wealth, and control over human well-being, Lowen explores the antithesis between a human being's embodied animal nature, which will die, and his human ego, a would-be God that seeks to avoid this faith. This antithesis is recognised as having a positive side, furthering the growth of culture and society, but it also has a destructive side. Lowen states that the conflict between the emotional body and the egoistic mind causes an even worse situation, the fear of life itself. This profound fear of life can result in psychotic breakdowns in many individuals and a fear of the breakdown of the social order itself and the world coming apart. For Lowen, then, the answer was a humble acceptance of reality, plus the wisdom of submitting through a somatic therapeutic process to the terrors of the unconscious and re-experiencing our already experienced psychological death. This results, he said, in peace of mind and a sense of fulfillment in life, which he described in the last chapter of his final book. Lowen said he'd achieved peace of mind, he'd resolved his own Oedipus complex, and he accepted his fate. I personally think that Alexander Lowen, like Freud, was a philosophic Stoic in coming to terms with and fully accepting the bare realities of existence. I'd like to talk about Lowen's use of Freudian and non-Freudian ideas. Lowen's psychotherapeutic understanding of the Oedipus complex as it affected individuals was essentially a mainstream classical Freudian interpretation which drew largely on the writings of Freud, Fenichel, and Reich. But when it came to reflecting on modernity, Lowen used several other intellectual resources to reflect on the story of Oedipus. I think that Lowen going outside the Freudian framework is quite a significant thing. Lowen was deeply impressed by the writings of the Jungian Erich Neumann, whom he quotes in several of his books. Lowen does not write much about the feminine, except in relation to his mother, who featured in his early therapy with Reich, and his wife, whom he dearly loved. But in Fear of Life, he quotes Neumann's ideas that the female goddesses of the matriarchal order were the rulers of life and death, and that men stood in awe of women and mothers. Lowen, again in relation to the feminine, says, Oedipus was blind to the fact that man is the son of a woman and must return to his mother the earth, on his marriage bed and on his deathbed. Lowen writes that in blinding himself, Oedipus found peace in the unconscious and in the body by turning against his ego, and he returned to the realm of Mother Earth. I've focused a little on the power of the feminine in discussing Lowen and the Oedipus story, as the classical Freudian Oedipus complex has rightly been criticised as being male-oriented and phallocentric. As well, the power of the feminine has been underestimated in Oedipal processes, and I'll return to these themes later. Freud, together with Reich and Lowen, were keen to avoid being seen as mystical and promoted forms of therapy that purported to be in accord with the scientific norms of Enlightenment rationality. And yet, paradoxically, by placing the Oedipus complex at the center of their psychotherapeutic endeavors, they opened the way for an examination not only of the psychological and the sexual, but also of the archetypal and transcendent dimensions of human existence. In other words, they were unwitting visionaries of the real as well as scientists, and they interpreted the meaning of the symbolic to illuminate the issues of their day, recovering the scientific and visionary perspectives. I believe we can start to recover both the scientific and visionary perspectives of Lowen's writings, firstly by recognizing two things, one positive and one negative. Positively, the Freudian concept of Oedipality did identify the essential elements in the formation of the human psyche, such as sexuality and aggression. It gave insights into the archaic, unconscious core of the psyche, as well as the processes of human development and gender identity. However, negatively, the classical Freudian interpretation of the Oedipus complex has been subject to major criticisms and adaptations and is culturally bound to Western forms of family organisation. For instance, in the USA, under the influence of self-psychology, the focus shifted from the myth of Oedipus to the myth of Narcissus, which meant that the patient's problems were no longer seen in terms of Oedipal dynamics, but as a result of primitive damage to the self in the pre-Oedipal stage. Others, reflecting on their own experiences as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and intersex people, have identified the Oedipus complex as inextricably tied to the heterosexual norms of gender and sexual identity, which were regarded as being identical categories. And feminist critics have strongly critiqued this phallocentric and heterosexual normative basis from a postmodern position. In England in 1945, Melanie Klein put the Oedipus complex back into the oral stage of development, linking it with primitive fantasies about the maternal body. A more recent Kleinian, John Steiner, a New Zealand psychoanalyst who lives in London, has shown that Freud's resolution of the Oedipus complex is in fact a primitive paranoid solution dominated by the wish for revenge against the father, and that more relational solutions are available. In the USA, James Grotstein, a wonderful writer who unfortunately died last year, a psychoanalyst, has described the Oedipus complex as being much more complex in depth and duration than what has been traditionally thought. Grotstein states that the Oedipus story is a mythic legend that underpins our search for truth, for freedom from guilt, and the search for radical transformation. As you can see, the Oedipus complex is such a powerful and rich concept that there is a kaleidoscope of views on its meaning and relevance. The reason I am focusing on it is that Alexander Lowen identified the Oedipus complex as a key story for understanding three things. Firstly, the psychodynamics of all individuals and their character structures. Secondly, is the key symbolic story for understanding modernity. And thirdly, for defining a body-oriented therapy as a therapy for being. Lowen noted that the importance of the Oedipus complex was being ignored in his day. And I think that is also true for us today, where the focus is no longer on the Oedipus complex, but rather on the abundant riches of effective neuroscience, attachment theory, trauma recovery, and relationality. These wonderful new paradigms are essential knowledge and are being incorporated into modern bioenergetics. But these modern paradigms, while necessary, may not be sufficient to give us ready access into the deeper, darker, and richer aspects of the human situation that is so necessary today. An understanding of the powerful dynamics of the Oedipus complex provided this depth of understanding for Freud, Reich, and Lowen, and it still may be able to do it for us today. We need to recover the relevance of Oedipality both for our own therapeutic work and for our views on human nature, so that bioenergetic analysis is not at risk at losing one of its major theoretical underpinnings. And I think we can be helped to do this by focusing on the concept of otherness. Recovering otherness in Oedipality. From a therapeutic perspective, Lowen's focus was primarily on understanding the functioning of the Freudian drives on the body and the psyche of the individual. As he says in his book, Fear of Life, quote, "For more than 30 years, my focus has been and is upon the individual as he struggles to find some meaning and satisfaction in this life." However, Lowen's primary focus on the individual, I believe, reflects a deep aloneness at the heart of traditional bioenergetic analysis. Lowen's focus was on the vibratory body in relationship with itself in the world, not on a body whose nature is both to be in relationship with its own desires and to seek fulfillment through relationship with an other. He did not seem to fully appreciate the basic existential reality that the individual is constituted by her or his relations with others. This is a perspective we need to keep more fully incorporating into bioenergetic analysis. Paul Ricoeur, the French philosopher, in his book, Oneself as Another, asserts that otherness is not added on to selfhood from the outside. Otherness is a constitutive part of the self's very being and meaning. And for Paul Ricoeur, the otherness of the body gives rise to our three greatest experiences at the level of meaning: my experience of my own body, my experience of embodied others, and my experience that I wish to live ethically with and for others. Because this relational perspective was not on the intellectual horizon when Lowen was writing, he did not directly explore or write about this inherent otherness of the body. That was not his focus. However, if we view Oedipal dynamics through the lens of otherness, we can help loosen our Lowenian inheritance from its strong embeddedness within classical Freudian drive theory and its focus on the individual. And we can do this if we begin to see the beginnings of Oedipality right back into the archaic and undifferentiated core of the human psyche, and start with the central role of the feminine and calling life into being out of the void. This maternal call of love into the dark space is a call to our primordial and archaic psyche to transition into a world of beingness, a world of sensual embodiment, and a world of connectedness. And when the infant sees himself or herself reflected back in the eyes of a loving mother, the I of the infant is transformed into a me, as someone who has made an impression on someone else out in the world who loves him or her. This sense of a me is also the beginning sense of a self. This is a profound experience of saying yes to life, yes to being nurtured by an other, the pre-Oedipal mother, whose gazes, caresses, and primary preoccupation lays the foundations for our erotic sexual selves. And it is safe to go on being, as Winnicott says, because the child now has had an existential experience of themselves in relation to the other. We need to remember that the pre-Oedipal mother who calls the child into relationship already has in her psyche her own Oedipal father, and she is a mother who is already immersed in an Oedipal world of others. The mother is also the only one of the three to have had an intimate relationship in the flesh with both the father and the child, even if it is expressed differently. The child's yes to experience the sensual embodiment by the feminine grows in complexity over time as the child begins to meet with the no of the father. This no of the father is initially a disruptive attunement to the smooth, loving attunement of the mother, and attests to the presence of a triangular relationship from the outset of the child's life, since both homeostasis and disruption are needed for emotional regulation and development. This disruptive no of the father grows into a strong prohibition by the time of the classical Oedipus complex, age 3 to 5, and becomes a no that signifies the child cannot have eternal and exclusive access to the maternal body. This no, however, also contains the possibility that the child can be in a real relationship with a significant other who is not mother, and also that the mother can be in an intimate relationship without the child. The developmental achievement in this is that accepting the transformation from two-ness into thirdness, the child can develop an embodied, grounded sense of their own social self. The acceptance of the Oedipal yes and no also ushers in the capacity for self-reflection, for the development of a linguistic and symbolic self, for the development of an individuated gendered sexuality, and the capacity for regulated aggression. Most importantly, it opens up the focus to be on the other and not narcissistically on the self. All this places the maturing embodied self into a cultural and social matrix where love, sexuality, mythology, religion, art, poetry, philosophy, science, and psychotherapy help to disclose the deeper dimensions of life. I've been talking about individual development, recovering a scientific view of the individual. As I said earlier, Lowen had both this individual and social critique. And so I'm going to talk now about recovering a visionary perspective of the social. On the socio-cultural level, let's recall that Lowen used the Oedipus story to shed light on the dysfunctional structures of Western societies that valued power, wealth, and control over human well-being. This search for deeper meaning remains as true for us today as it did for Alexander Lowen. We only need to look at the rising tide of hatred and paranoia towards others who are different, the vast numbers of refugees from torture and oppression, and the threat of extinction to 1 million life forms on Earth. Lowen intuitively understood and accessing Erich Neumann's ideas that we need myths, stories, and symbols to help us understand the deep coherence and meaning of life. As Paul Ricoeur, the French philosopher, has said, a powerful myth, story, or symbol gives us a gift of meaning that we need to creatively interpret so that we are not left in silence and confusion in the face of fear and terror, but are more deeply embedded in objective reality. A potent myth, story, or symbol should awaken us existentially and restore our relationship with ourselves, with each other, and the earth, so that we can squarely face into our current reality. And so the myth of Oedipus, based on the Greek tragedy by Sophocles, was a potent symbol that gave Freud, Reich, and Lowen meaningful access into the power of sexuality, into the deepest dynamics of human love and hate, into human frailty, forgiveness and redemption, and into fate, life, and death. Today, we may not fully realize in our fears and confusions at the complexity of modern life that the Oedipus myth may be living us, and that we need to open our eyes and pay attention. Professor Soya, in his book, one of his many books, Cultivating the Soul, provides his own wonderful exposition of Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus the King. The professor suggests there is a need to examine the murdered and murderer other within oneself. And as he was saying in his talk, pointing the finger inwards rather than outwards. And like Lowen, the professor highlights the dilemma we all face in reconciling truth and reason. Truth represented by ancient truths and by the mysterious depths of our own irrational emotions, and reason represented by knowledge that we wish to keep perfecting ourselves forever at the expense of our emotions. My sense is that in reconciling the difference between embodied truth and instrumental reason, we need to keep on recovering, as both Alexander Lowen and Professor Zoya have pointed out, the primacy of our bodies and our feelings, as well as a deep respect for the other. And the pathway to this is to reclaim the power of the feminine and the maternal in a world dominated by psychopathic male leaders in the political, corporate, and armament spheres. We also need the feminine and the power of love to pull us out of an impending void, te kori, the Maori term, the world of darkness and death. And we need the good masculine and the paternal power of a loving no to help us mature into responsible and authentic human beings, and to fully recognize the face and body of another who is not family or friend, but is truly other, and hence is identical with ourselves. This reflects the wisdom in all religions to love your neighbour as yourself. And this radical truth must continue to invite us to find a common humanity with all people of different cultures and beliefs. In conclusion, what we can say is that the tragedies that are occurring in the sacred sites, the fire destroying Notre Dame, the symbolic universal mother, and the blood flowing from the ravaged bodies of the other at prayer in mosques, synagogues, churches and temples, indicates that we are facing a crisis of mythic proportions. Perhaps we need to listen even more urgently to the strongly coded messages that Mother Earth and our own bodies are sending us. That no, we cannot keep pursuing all our material desires, depleting the earth and its resources. Perhaps we need a heightened archetypal awareness that having been revealed as murderers of the earth, its myriad life forms and other humans who are not us, we can, like Oedipus, become heroic by seeing the earth as a sacred grove which is communally shared by all living creatures. This is not an idealistic recall to the Garden of Eden, but a wide-eyed demand to immerse ourselves in the bare reality and necessities we face today. Not with stoicism, but with the faith in the power of authentic love that can connect with the face and body of the other, so that both they and ourselves might be healed. So that we can say, like the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, you are us. In the story of Oedipus, the oracle at Delphi was consulted twice, and her answers were misinterpreted with tragic results. And so this conference gives us all a chance to gather and interpret the signs of our times, hopefully correctly, through the sensing of our own bodies and feelings, and to update the paternal legacy of Alexander Lowen's insistence on the primacy of the body, so that we can emerge with a clearer vision of what a bioenergetic view of love, healing, connection, and authenticity means to us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Garry, for your very rich presentation that certainly deserves to be read to extract all the richness that has in it. Okay.